Welcome, Spartans, to today's Professional Series webcast. My name is Dave Isbell, and I am the Assistant Director of Alumni Professional Enrichment in the MSU Alumni Association. I'm also your host for today's webinar entitled Negotiate Your Way to Success. Before I introduce you to today's presenter, I want to let you know that we host these webinars every second and fourth Thursday of each month at 12:30 p.m. EST. And these webinars are recorded. They'll be available within a few days of the live cast on our blog at spartanshelpingspartans.com. I also want to point out that the chat box on the left-hand side of your screen, please feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation by typing in the box at the bottom of the chat box anytime. If our presenter does not answer your questions during the presentation, I'll circle back to the end of the presentation to make sure that she addresses it. I'd also like to invite you to continue the conversation with us on Twitter by following us at Helping Spartans. For this conversation, we'll use the hashtag negotiation. It's my honor to introduce you to today's presenter, Molly Fletcher. Nicknamed the female Jerry Maguire by CNN, Molly Fletcher spent nearly 2 decades as a sports agent recruiting the top athletes, coaches, and media personalities in the game. She worked with some of the biggest names in sports, not to mention our own Tom Izzo, negotiating over $500 million in contracts. Her clients included Major League Baseball stars, PGA and LPGA golfers, NBA and NCAA coaches, and media personalities. Numerous media outlets have featured Molly, including CNN, ESPN, Fast Company, Forbes, and Sports Illustrated. In 2010, Molly left the sports agency business and started her own consulting company based in Atlanta. A popular keynote speaker and team-building facilitator, Molly applies lessons learned from her years of experience in the sports industry to the business world. She's also the founder of the online learning platform, the Betterment Institute, and the author of 3 books. Her newest book, A Winner's Guide to Negotiating: How Conversation Gets Deals Done, is on sale now. In it, Molly breaks down the 5-step process to effective negotiating to help you not only close more deals, but to set yourself up for the next big one. Molly's a graduate of Michigan State University, where she walked on to the tennis team, earning a scholarship and captaining the team as a senior. An active member of the community, Molly is a national trustee member for the Boys and Girls Clubs of America. She lives in Atlanta with her husband Fred and their 3 daughters, all 3 just 12 months apart. Please help me welcome Molly Fletcher. Fletcher.
David, thank you so much. Hey, fellow Spartans, it is fun to be with you today. And, you know, for the last 20 years, I've had a chance to work with some amazing people, right? Guys like Tom Izzo. And what I learned throughout that process is the negotiation is really in many ways just a conversation. And I worked in a business where every day, you know, all day, right, we were negotiating endorsement deals, appearances, contracts, and pulled back and recognized, gosh, there's a formula inside of this that hopefully can help other people feel more comfortable with the process. So it was a fun book to write, and I'm excited to share some things in hopes that it will help you do what you do in your world. So, you know, what's amazing is when you look at the statistics, actually 86% of people want to learn how to negotiate more effectively, but 55% say that any negotiation skills they have, they were self-taught. So that was the gap that I saw, and in many ways the reason why I put this book together. So my goal today is sort of arm you with a process that I hope you can lay over any deal, any conversation, any negotiation at any level that you have in your life, and it will allow you to do it better, feel more confident about the approach that you take to do it. So I'll pause throughout the process. I love to make these interactive, so don't be shy to post questions, and I'll address those after each of the sections. So I'm going to walk through about five sections. So each, you know, every about 10, 12 minutes, I welcome questions, so don't be shy. So I want to start by sort of talking about, you know, the fact that the greatest thing, right, the coolest thing is that negotiators aren't born, they're made. And so I hope that inspires you to recognize that wherever you are in the process, right, at any level, you can become great at it. And so when we think about the process, though, when we think about preparing for negotiation, to me, the first step in that process is to really set the stage. Before you enter into any negotiation, you really want to set the stage. And to me, that's about really finding hard data to support your position and then marrying that with qualitative data, you know, sort of to understand, you know, the bigger picture. So when we think about that, I think the first process in that is in regards to finding the comparables, right? So the comparables are obviously the price that's being paid for sort of this particular product or service. So we see that a lot in real estate and car deals, et cetera. So for you, I think that means really building relationships so that you can gain information from those relationships. And obviously also any third party, the interesting thing about the agent business that I've lived in, right, is that they don't talk to each other, right? Agents certainly aren't friendly, particularly with each other. It's an incredibly competitive business. It's actually a business where there's more agents than there are athletes to represent. So that's pretty unique, and so that makes it a little bit challenging. So, I would challenge you as you think about building comparables. It's really digging in and understanding. Are there colleagues you can lean on? Are there people that used to work for the organization or the people that you're negotiating with? Obviously our market research, our news reports. But to me, we live in a world where we can get so much stuff through so many platforms. So I would encourage you to just dig, right, to find those comparables as you prepare to set the stage. And then the second piece is obviously 360-degree awareness, right? So to me, what does that mean? That's really understanding the big picture and putting yourself in the other person's shoes. And obviously that's important, right? Putting yourself in their shoes, both sort of in your head and in your heart, right? Really understanding, or sort of in their head and in their heart. So a story, right? So Erin Andrews, who is now with Fox, a TV personality, I'm sure the guys on the other end of the phone are smiling. So Erin is a great friend, but I did Erin's deals with ESPN, and she was in a position where halfway through her ESPN deal, she really wanted to be on Dancing with the Stars. So we pursued that opportunity. She secured that opportunity, and as many of us know, did it. To me, where 360-degree awareness is relevant in this sort of story is that in Erin's view, right, we thought, gosh, could she command more money from ESPN because she'd obviously be on a bigger stage and potentially more well-known in light of doing Dancing with the Stars. But did that have an impact on the respect potentially that coaches would have for her, at halftime? Did it take away time from her studying and preparing? And what we uncovered as we went into our negotiation with ESPN is they didn't, in fact, value those things, that in fact they were worried that it distracted her from her time and preparing for the games and studying, and did it impact her ability to be respected by the coaches, and those were the things that they were worried about. And so it certainly enhanced her value to a network like Fox, because based on what they do and obviously what they air, that was a great fit for her. And so it's been a fantastic transition. But the reality was that from an awareness perspective, it certainly didn't necessarily add value to ESPN. So obviously, I think anytime we do anything in our lives, particularly as it relates to negotiation, it's really getting clear on what is the impact of what I'm doing as it relates to the other party. And so to me, for us, it's thinking about what does the other side really value, and for ESPN, right, when you get much bigger than those four letters, right, that sometimes causes a pause. So it's understanding what do they value, and what are their options, right? As Erin used to say, there's a laundry list of pretty girls ready to take my job, she would say, and it's an incredibly competitive space. And so it's understanding what the other side's options are, and obviously who the decision makers are, and any other factors, right? What else is in play? But at the core, when we set the stage for a negotiation, I think it's really getting clear and understanding that negotiations don't happen in a vacuum, that there are all kinds of moving parts. And the more awareness we have around those moving parts, I think the healthier we will be as we embark on what at the core is a difficult conversation, which is in fact negotiation. So, for us in the agency business, right, I mean, what did that mean, right? So if I was negotiating John Smoltz's contract, who was a right-handed pitcher for the Braves and a fellow Michigan guy, right, when we were negotiating his deals, we obviously had to understand, teams option roster, gaps in their rosters, payroll, free agents, minor league prospects. All those things were relevant as we set the stage and prepared for those conversations. So whenever we embark on a negotiation, I would just challenge you to make sure you're armed with the data that you need to make sure that you can navigate yourself through that difficult conversation. So I'll pause for a minute. Does anybody have any questions, thoughts, sort of on when we think about setting the stage that they want to load up and post? Okay, I don't see any coming in, so I'm going to just keep rolling, right? So don't be shy, though, as I said, to fire off any questions. And anything is welcome. So when we go through the process of negotiation, the second piece that I think is important is to understand that, we've got to be able to find common ground with the people that we're negotiating. And what's been interesting is that 90% of negotiators, sort of the data says, fail to really prepare with the diagnostic questions, the questions about the values and the goals and the fears and, right, the needs of the other party. So, we've got to find a way at the core to really connect. And one time I walked in to negotiate John Smoltz's contract with the Atlanta Braves, and I was sitting in the office of the general manager, John Shearholtz, at the time. And as I was sitting there, I looked behind him, and we were about 20 minutes into the conversation. He had really no idea why I was in the room. He didn't know if I was a secretary or an attorney taking notes or what my role was. He really wasn't paying any attention to me. And so behind him was a screensaver of rotating golf holes. And behind the golf holes on the screensaver were just beautiful golf holes, one after another. And as I was looking at them, I sort of recognized them, and I said, wow, gosh, I said, man, that's number 12 at Augusta National, right? I said, that's that beautiful par 3. And I said, gosh, I bet you've played it. I said, what'd you get on 12? And he sort of paused and he goes, yeah, man, I played it last week. He said, it's unbelievable. He said, I bogeyed it. And I said, wow. And sort of paused and smiled and said, wow, man. I said, listen, man, I played that about a month ago. And I said, I birdied it. And in that moment, we sort of connected, right? All of a sudden he went, wait a minute, this is kind of fun. And we started talking about golf for like 20 minutes. And it sort of diverted us from the negotiation, but it gave us a platform to connect. So when we think about finding common ground, to me, it doesn't mean necessarily that we've got to reveal our cards about the deal that we're negotiating with the other party. But what it does mean is to let our guard down at some level so that we can, in fact, connect. Because I believe when we do that, when we share something, it can be personal, it can be professional, separate and apart from the deal that we're negotiating, it gives us a platform to really connect. I think it signals, openness, and hopefully the other side responds with the same thing, right? So hopefully the other side recognizes that and begins to share, which is what happened with Shearholtz. And most of these GMs hate agents, right? So then about a month later, after we'd done the deal, I ran into him at a local restaurant, and he was kind enough to offer me and my colleague, we ended up joining him for a burger at the bar. But great guy, and that connection, in many ways, that relationship has flourished in light of things like that. So I would challenge you as you embark on any difficult conversation, any negotiation, that you recognize the power in that. The other piece that I think is important when we think about finding common ground is adding value. In other words, adding value to the relationship makes the relationship more comfortable, right? So finding common ground, to me, happens through really learning the other side's frustrations, their concerns, what needs in their world aren't being met, and hopefully finding a way to add value to whatever that gap is. So when we think about that, to me, that happens by asking open-ended questions certainly is obviously important. Turning defensiveness into curiosity inside of those difficult conversations is incredibly important. And then people always ask me, right, is it better to negotiate in person or over the phone? I certainly am a fan for sure of negotiating in person when we can. We get so much data back when we negotiate in person. We get so much feedback on the level of energy and potentially anxiety associated with the other party when we can look at them and we can be in the same room. So I need to apologize. I haven't done a very good job of navigating these slides, so I'm going to smoke through the first few. They just give you a little bit of a graphic, but so again, right? Any questions? Please don't be shy. So when we think about any negotiation, I would challenge you to really make sure that you have 360-degree awareness, that you really set the stage well, that you spend time getting inside their head and potentially inside of their heart so that you can understand what motivates them. And then find ways to connect with them separate and apart from the deal. Find ways to add value. All those things create a connection. And we live in a world where, there's a lot of choices of people that we want to work with. So if people don't like you at the core, I don't think, they're going to want to do deals with you. So, I think that in many ways was how I signed Izzo, right? Izzo was a guy who knew that I was an athlete at Michigan State and knew that I understood, the sort of the Michigan State Athletic Department and Mark Hollis and the team there. And that connection, that at the core was a common ground. That was a connection that we made early on, and certainly allowed me to have an opportunity to negotiate on his behalf. So when we think about negotiation, I would challenge you to think about it inside of those two things. Now, and so as we kind of get into the meat of this, right? I mean, when we think about negotiation, obviously, then we've got to ask for what we want, which is often where fear creeps in, right? It's often where things get a little hairy, and a sort of a whopping 59% of respondents said that they absolutely dread salary negotiations because it makes them nervous and it makes them apprehensive. And certainly that is incredibly common. When we think about the top 4 reasons why people don't negotiate their salary, number 1 is fear, right? It's just fear of losing and obviously ruining a relationship. That's number 1. Number 2 is it's unpleasant. We also, I think, hear that when we think about asking for what we want, there's often a lack of confidence. I hope that this session hopefully can arm you and inspire you to have more confidence, to practice this more on a smaller stage so that when you walk in to potentially negotiate a big deal inside of the work that you do or negotiate a contract for yourself, that you'll feel more confident about doing it, which to me is half the battle. And, the 4th reason that a lot of times people don't negotiate their salary is if they don't have the skill set. So again, I hope this supports you at some small level. So when we think about asking with confidence, I'll tell you a fun story. When I graduated from Michigan State, I moved down to Atlanta and had an opportunity through networking for several months to work for the Super Bowl host committee. So it was Super Bowl 28. It was going to be in Atlanta. It was 1993. And through a myriad of people that were kind enough to meet me for coffee for 15 minutes, I networked and got connected with a gentleman that was running the Super Bowl, Lehman Bennett, the former coach of the Falcons. So I was sitting with Lehman, and as we were talking, he was excited, and he said, "Look, I'm going to give you an opportunity, Molly." He said, "Listen, what we're going to do is we're going to pay you $600 a month." And I was so excited to have an opportunity in sports that I didn't even really register that wasn't really going to fly, right? That wasn't enough money to live on. But fortunately, I had negotiated for free rent. That's in my first book. That's sort of a fun story. But so my Super Bowl, so he offers me this job for $600 a month, and I get in the car and I call my parents because I'm pumped that I can now potentially stay in Atlanta and pursue my aspirations of being in the sports business. And my dad quickly reminds me that $600 a month isn't enough money for me to live on. And so I picked up the phone and I called Lehman immediately, and I said, "Hey, Lehman," I said, I'm really excited. I said, "But I have a question for you." I said, the $600 a month, I said, "You meant a week, right?" And just paused, and he was a very nice man, and he sort of laughed, and he said, "No, Molly, I meant a month." He said, "That's what I can pay you." And he was pretty firm. But what that taught me, and I think in many ways what that prepared me for, is to ask for what we want in life. And so often in negotiation, I think asking for what we want is sort of analogous to a quarterback in the pocket, right? So when a quarterback drops back in the pocket, he's got a window of time to make a pass before that pocket closes up. And I think it's the same in negotiation. When we negotiate, we have a window of time to make that ask. Had I gone in the first day and had that conversation with my boss, Lehman, at the time, that probably wouldn't have worked out real well, right? And so we want to think about and be aware when we ask of timing. And to me, it's very similar to the quarterback piece. So I would just challenge you to recognize that. Also, when we think about asking with confidence, I would just challenge you to sort of get outside of what we often think is the norm. So I have 3 daughters that are now 11 and 10, And of course, they all needed braces here recently. And so when I went in to go get them their braces, as I'm sitting there in the orthodontist office, I had a conversation with them, and I kind of figured out what kind of they were worried about, what bothered them, billing and all that kind of stuff. And she tells me it's going to be $9,000 a kid, or no, I'm sorry, $9,000 for all three, $3,000 a kid for their orthodontic work, right? So, and this is stage one, right? As you guys, many of you know who are parents out there, right? There's 2 stages now, which is great fun. So I had sort of gotten clear on what was maybe frustrating about her business. And so I sort of smiled and I looked at her and I said, how about $6,000? I'll pay you in cash up front. You don't have to bill me or anything. And we can just sort of, do it that way, and just sort of stop talking. And after going back and talking to the docs and all that kind of stuff, she came back and agreed to the deal. So we were able to sort of do a buy 2, get 1 free program. But I share that with you because oftentimes in life, we think that things aren't negotiable. We think that we can't ask. And I would just encourage you to recognize that most everything in life is negotiable. And oftentimes it just takes having the courage to ask, recognizing the opportunity to negotiate even exists. And often this is sort of the first mistake, is just not realizing that you're even inside of a potential negotiation. So I would encourage you to look at each and every opportunity, each and every conversation and discussion potentially as an opportunity to connect in a way that potentially creates a platform for negotiation. And when we think about that tactically, to me, it's about making a conversation about we, not me. So framing up the ask using the we word, not the me word, and really framing the ask up about the benefits to the collective group, which means you're really kind of showing an understanding of their perspective and you're not just coming at it from your own interests. That's, to me, really, really important. So tactically, when we think about the ask, I would encourage you to think about that. And lastly, as we think about making the ask, I would encourage you to just be authentic, right? Somebody asked me once, what do you think the most important thing is in business? And I think it flows through sort of anything in business, but it's to be authentic. And right, that's what our basketball coach, Tom, does incredibly well, right? Who you see and who we all see on TV is the same guy at the kitchen table, right? He is a class act and he is authentic all the time. So I think it's recognizing that inside of difficult conversations, inside of negotiations, we don't need to feel like we need to change our persona when we go into negotiation, that to be authentic, to stay open to the approach of a conversation, right? Because the goal is to keep the conversation going. The goal is to allow the conversation to continue. So as you think about anything in your life, any deal that you want to negotiate, right? We want to first set the stage, then we want to make sure that we can connect. And then we want to make sure that we ask for what we want, and we ask with confidence, right? And recognize that it's about we, not me. And I think when we do that, we'll see, great results. So, fourth, I encourage people to really embrace the pause after they make the ask. So, what does that mean when we think about embracing the pause? So often, a common tendency, right, in negotiation is to believe that a negotiation has to happen in one meeting. One of the most important pieces I sort of advise is to really embrace the pause. So after you make the ask, the pause is a chance for reflection, right? It's a chance to maybe create a little anticipation on the other side. It's maybe a chance to remove, potentially undue emotion. It shifts control, certainly. And at the core, it signals tremendous poise as well. And I think when we think about sports, right? Sports there's a built-in pause inside of all of sports. You think about golf between shots, there's a pause. When we think about tennis, right, there's a pause at the changeover. When we think about football, there's timeouts, basketball timeouts, right? So the pause to me is really natural, but it is in fact really one of the hardest things I think for people to do is to pause. So when you make the ask, I would just encourage you to be intentional about pausing after you make that ask. It's hard to do, but it's incredibly important. So, for me, an example is when we're recruiting a player as an agent, and you've done a lot of things, right? You've gotten in front of him, and obviously you've pitched him. You've probably done, brought him some endorsement deals. You've done a bunch of stuff for him to try to get a player. And as we go through that process, at some point, I'm going to look at him and say, are you happy with your agent? Or, we would love to have the opportunity to represent you. That's like just short of asking somebody to marry you, right? So it's a big, big question. It's heavy. So it's sort of like a medicine ball. That's the analogy I use, is that it's sort of like a medicine ball, and you toss it over to the other side, and it lands, and it's heavy, and it lands with sort of finality. And, a heavy question is the same way, and you have to sort of treat it like that. You throw it over there, and you leave it alone. So when I ask an athlete that question, it's a heavy question, and I'm not only interested in what they say, but I'm interested in how they say it. And I think it's important after we make the ask to recognize that we don't want to finish it with or or a whole bunch of other stuff, right? We want to let it settle, just like you do when you work out with a medicine ball, right? So I would encourage you to have the courage to embrace the pause and recognize that when we do that, and particularly when we do that in person, we want to see, do they appear anxious? Are they eager? Are they concerned and nervous? Are they confident? Are they quick? What are all the things that are coming back? Those are all signals. That's all data. That's incredibly helpful as we navigate through a negotiation. And it's one of the hardest things to do. So it's something, again, right, that I would encourage you to practice. Practice inside of smaller moments, so that when you're sitting in front of your boss to negotiate a raise, or in front of an employee who you're hiring, that you're comfortable with that pause. When we think about a pause, I'll tell you sort of a real life story, right? So one of the guys that I worked with was Jeff Francoeur, and Jeff Francoeur was a right fielder for the Atlanta Braves, a kind of a hometown hero in Atlanta, a guy that was on the cover of Sports Illustrated as the natural. And, the world was expecting big things from Jeff, and he was a local kid in Atlanta and was drafted by the Atlanta Braves. So he had, the world was sort of watching him here in Atlanta, and there was a little bit of pressure on him. Well, we were inside of arbitration, which is after their 3 years of service in the big leagues, they have an opportunity. The athlete has an opportunity. A baseball player has the opportunity to go to arbitration. So that's when the team still owns his rights. And if we can't come to terms with the team during a certain window of time, then we have to go sit in front of 3 arbitrators that really make the decision of what the athlete gets paid. And the athlete sits there too. So it's not really a very pleasant situation for athletes. We often don't like to see athletes in that situation, because they hear the team, the people that they see in the clubhouse and on the airplanes and all that kind of stuff. They hear these guys saying all the bad things about the kids so that they can get their value down. So I'm not a big fan of arbitration. I prefer to try to get it done with the GM. So we were negotiating Francoeur's contract, and we were days before we were going to go to Arizona to go to arbitration. And, first the general manager of the Braves had me talking to, 2 down from him because it was an arbitration case. So the GM didn't handle it. Then he brought it up to the assistant GM. After a couple of days, we couldn't come to terms. And then sort of in the 9th inning, the GM sort of started handling it. And my client, Francoeur, was very sort of confident and firm in what he believed he was worth. So that was great. He definitely had my back as it relates to being able to ask for what we wanted and what we thought he was worth. So it was 11 o'clock at night, the day before we were leaving for arbitration. The GM found out through a couple sources that we were in fact booked on a flight to go out there. So he knew that we were in fact truly firm. So at 11 o'clock at night, my phone rings, and I buy, pajamas with pockets in it, right? So that I can, answer my phone all the time, right? Which is really kind of sad. But so I had the phone by my bed. 11 o'clock at night, the phone rings, and it's the GM of the Braves, and he says, "Hey, Molly," it was Frank Wren at the time. He said, "Hey, Molly, it's Frank." He said, "Listen, are you guys still, where you're at?" And I said, "Yes, Frank." I said, we're still where we're at." and I just stopped talking. And I'm laying in bed, and it's 11 o'clock at night, and it's, it's been a full minute, and the guy hasn't said anything. I put it on mute. My husband's like, "Are you kidding me? Is this guy still on the phone?" And then I finally, after almost 2 minutes of this guy not saying anything, he says, "All right, fine." He said, "Done." He said, "We got a deal." And it was a moment inside of that pause where it would have been really, really easy to continue the conversation from the perspective of defending why I felt like his plate appearances need to be what they were at, why I felt like his bonuses, why I felt like his in-game appearances, why I felt like his base number needed to be where it was at. But I had done all that because we'd set the stage very, very well. We'd made it clear what we felt like he should be paid. So it's hard, no question, to embrace that pause. It's hard to be silent inside of those moments, but boy, is it important. So when I embraced that pause, to me, it sent him a message that we were confident. It sent him a message that I don't have to justify our position anymore by giving multiple points about why we felt that way. So the more points sometimes that we feel compelled to give, at the core, I think the weaker those points become. And that gives the other side a chance to jump, on one of those potentially weaker points. So when we think about negotiation, I would challenge you to recognize the power of the pause, to recognize the value that the pause has inside of negotiation. So again, right? So, we set the stage, we find common ground, right? We ask for what we want, which is incredibly important. And then obviously we want to embrace the pause after we do that. So again, I just want to quickly pause and see if there's any questions. They'll load up here on my computer screen and I can see them, and I'm happy to react to any of them. I know you guys aren't shy. And if not, you can save them all up and type them in. But David, I'm not missing anything, am I? I don't see any questions.
No, Molly, I just put one in there that Kristen sent directly to me.
Okay, that's not coming through, so do you want to just lob it in?
Sure. Can you address the pause on teleconference versus in person? Too much emotion versus them not having any idea of the message your silence is trying to convey.
Right. So, so what I'm hearing the question is can you kind of recognize the power of the pause inside of teleconferences? Yeah, certainly that creates a bit of a different dynamic. I think my initial reaction to that would be it's still important, it still works, and it may mean that you have to say, "You know what, I need a minute," and then pause. So it may need to be that you're informing them of what you're doing so that they know that you're still there, right? But that's what you're doing intentionally. In regards to emotion, I'm going to talk about that a little bit in the next section of knowing when to leave any difficult conversation. But certainly emotion plays into it in really big ways. Typically, I think emotion impacts us in a negative way inside of a negotiation. And the more that we can remove emotion, the better. And the more that we can tap into the emotion of the other party that we're negotiating with, obviously, the better. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, don't be shy to clarify and post another one. David, are there any others?
How long do you think is too long for a pause?
It's a great question. Well, I think that's inside of each situation. So I've had pauses that are a month. I've had pauses that are a week. I've had pauses that are 2 minutes. I think a pause, it depends on the amount of leverage that you have. It depends on the particular situation. It depends on any current deadlines. And I appreciate that question because to me, it gives me an opportunity to clarify the fact that when we talk about a pause, I talked about it in that Frank Core negotiation as in a phone call, as in minutes and seconds. But a pause can be weeks, it can be months. So I would recognize that and marry it with the deadline and the leverage that you have in place as you sort of process how long that pause should be. David, any other?
Kristen asks, is it okay to acknowledge when you truly aren't confident or comfortable? When is it okay not to be confident?
I think it depends on who you're negotiating with. So if I'm negotiating with the general manager of a team, I certainly don't want to acknowledge that I'm not confident. If I'm or comfortable, if you're negotiating with somebody that knows you pretty well, I think it's okay to say, you know what, I'm not a big fan of these conversations, but I think they're important. And so I'm going to work through this, but I need to have it with you. And I think it's okay with people that there is some level of safety with some level of existing trust. I think it's okay to acknowledge that in a professional way, but certainly with in that dynamic, right? Maybe with a vendor. Obviously, to me, that is ineffective in those situations. But with people that you have a relationship with and where there's some safety, I think it's okay. David, any others? These are great.
Mina asks, when people try to negotiate salary, for example, the supervisors or managers typically say that they do not have budgets. What would be the best way to respond?
Can you repeat that?
When people try to negotiate salary, for example, the supervisors or managers typically say that they do not have budgets. What would be the best way to respond?
Thanks, David. I think you want to respond with curiosity. And so you want to begin to understand the way the budget is built. What are the things that they look at inside of that? Obviously, as much as they can share with you as it relates to that, I think is really important. But to me, it's understanding kind of the guidelines so that you understand how to work around them or inside of them so that you can, get to a number that you want to get to, whether it's then or eventually. So again, right, I think that's a moment when you want to begin to go into question mode and ask them, tell me a little bit about how the budget works. I mean, can you give me a little bit of insight on that and what kinds of things are going to change in order for that, for that to change, right? I mean, what you really want to understand, and you can explain this to them, is that I just want to understand how to go from A to B. And so any indication that you can give me of the sort of the rules and inside of that, it's just going to help motivate me to understand it and in turn exceed those so that I can not hear that sort of it's a budget issue. But you want to go into curious mode and understand how their budget works so that you can understand how to add enough value that's going to allow you to get an increase in pay. But that to me is not an answer that's comforting. It's not an answer that you want. It's not an answer that's exciting to go home to your spouse with, right? So I'd really encourage you to push on that and ask again a lot of questions so that you can understand what that gap is, so that you can begin to sort of build your own game plan of, can you close it, or do you need to go look somewhere else because that gap is significant and you're never going to be able to make enough money there to sort of fulfill you. David, what else? What other questions?
Kellen asks, apologies for any redundancy, but what are your thoughts on eye contact during a negotiation leading into a pause?
Great question. No redundancy. I think eye contact is incredibly powerful. Obviously, I think how does it work? I think inside of the ask. So I might ask an athlete, "Are you happy with your agent?" I'm going to look at him right in the eyes when I make that ask, and then I'm going to continue to look at him as I pause. Obviously, when it starts to get to that weird point, right? You don't want to be weird, and you don't want it to be uncomfortable for them. So then you can certainly look away and look back and look away and look back. But when you make that ask and when you embrace the pause, you can give a good 5-10 seconds of looking at them, I think, before you sort of look away and before certainly that moment gets weird or awkward. But eye contact is incredibly powerful inside of pauses, certainly. What else, David?
Sarah says, I've recently had a few job interviews in which I have asked for a larger pay rate than the industry or geography standards. A common response is that there are corporate grades that cannot change. In an area with job scarcity and unfamiliar people, what are some options to get better responses?
You know, I think sometimes you want to try to talk about the package. So in other words, you know, there may be an opportunity to talk about other ways that you can add value to increase the dollar amount. Other ways that are not as difficult for them. Maybe it's inside of the 401k. Maybe it's inside of vacation days. Maybe it's inside of bonuses, upside. But to me, look at the entire landscape of the value that you provide. Look at the entire landscape of their needs. See if there's a gap that in addition to what you do, you could potentially fill. And then also recognize, are there other things that they can do that aren't necessarily skin off their back, but are helpful to you and beneficial to you? Maybe it's a 401k, right? Maybe it's, you know, things of that nature. So I think, again, right, inside of those moments that we get there, we want to stay curious so we can understand what the position of the other side and understand what their gaps are and understand why they're there and what at the core they value, what's important to them. All those things, I think, help dig in and help you see what is the gap and can you fill it. And you know, to me, I would sort of start with that, but recognize sort of the whole package piece. Look at that entire package and look at their gaps and see if there's more that you can do to add value. What else, David? Any others?
That's all we have so far. That's all we have so
Awesome.
far.
So
if you
then
wanna
this
keep
might
rolling.
help given some of the questions that
We have so far if you want to keep rolling.
Okay, awesome. So that's so this might be helpful for particularly that last question as it relates to you know, we're getting a lot of sort of salary questions, which is great. So what I want to do is sort of finish with how do we know when to leave, right? How do we know when to walk away potentially from a negotiation, which I know is always difficult and challenging, but obviously understanding and knowing when to leave is important. And it's one of the hardest things to do, right? But I really believe that an agreement that isn't good or isn't necessarily better than, you know, no agreement, right? So recognizing that inside of our negotiations is important. So I think tactically, right, it's knowing your bargaining range, and you need to have clarity going into any negotiation about, you know, what you want out of it. Whenever I would negotiate a player's deal, I'd always say, you know, what's my target, right? What would I be excited about if we got, and what would I be excited about if we didn't get? In other words, what would I be content walking away from? But having that range in mind gives you some level of clarity as you embark on the conversation. And you know, and I think it's asking yourself, at what point am I comfortable walking away, and sort of what does success look like? So I would encourage you, particularly some of you that asked some of the salary questions, to recognize sort of that tactically inside of those situations. So, you know, knowing when to leave, I think this is where, and we had a question on emotion. This is to me where emotion comes into play, certainly a little bit. And you know, I would be really weary of great emotion. You know, I think we've got to be able to detach ourselves from emotion and a negotiation, and really work to not take things personally. And so the more we can eliminate undue emotion, I think the more clarity we have. Emotion really clouds, you know, our vision, and is really a big factor sometimes of people not recognizing that they do in fact need to leave. To me, that is incredibly important. So getting clear on what your limits are ahead of time will support you if there is emotion inside of a particular conversation that you need to have. So when we negotiated, actually it was Smoltzy's contract with the Atlanta Braves. In hindsight, I really see how the Braves set the stage with John, right? So they read John's quotes in the paper about, how important manager Bobby Cox was to him. And when John would talk to the media or on planes or in the training room, which he spent a lot of time in, he would talk about how much he loved Atlanta. He would talk about how much he loved the dugout, how much he loved the bullpen, how much he loved Bobby Cox, how much he loved the community. And he's incredibly ingrained in the Atlanta community from both from a charitable perspective and certainly at the time as a player. So the Braves, from the data that they had gathered, really kind of determined that, $30 million was enough to pay him for him to not leave. They really felt like $30 million would keep him, even though that was under market value. They felt like that was just enough to keep him. The Braves bet that John wouldn't ultimately leave. And they were right, because dollars weren't enough to disconnect him from at the core what was the emotion that went in much deeper than his profession. His relationship with Bobby was really important part of what he loved about being a Brave. And they saw the sense of loyalty that he had to Bobby. And the guys that he pitched with, Maddox and Glavine, had left. And they knew that John was hearing stories from those guys that, it wasn't the same and that it was challenging. So they tapped into that emotion that John had. And because of that, we left $52 million on the table from the Yankees. And, and I told John, I said, you look good in pinstripes, because he's got a little bit of a belly. I said, those up and down stripes would be good for you, But I share that story with you because I think it recognizes that, at the core, he left, $22 million on the table because of emotion. At the core, it was because of emotion. And for the Braves, it was all business. There was no emotion there at all. It was all business. And because it was all business and because they tapped into his emotion, they saved $22 million. So I share that story with you only to share that that emotion can be incredibly powerful. And so I would encourage you, as you think about deals that you're doing, as you think about salary negotiations that you're having or conversations that you're having, is to say to yourself, what are your trigger points from an emotion perspective? What are the 2 to 3 times lately that you've gotten angry or have gotten frustrated inside of, a negotiation or a conversation? Because there may be an opportunity to sort of self-discover there and understand what your trigger points are so that you can potentially avoid putting yourself inside of that, or at least recognize and anticipate that so that you can offset it. So self-awareness around kind of those trigger points is key, because the lack of emotion inside a negotiation, obviously, I think is important. And inside of those moments, there's an opportunity, right, to really build in a pause, to check the emotion and don't take, don't take leaving off the table, I think is incredibly important. But knowing when to leave is a chapter in the book, and I think something that's important to recognize. We walked away from lots of deals, and we did obviously lots of deals, but recognizing that you can walk away, and also recognizing that leaving doesn't mean it's forever, right? Leaving could be intentional and authentic, but maybe at the end of the day, it ends up being just a really long pause. So I'm going to pause there, David, and see if we have any other questions that have come in. I'd love to address.
Helena asks, can you describe value?
Sure. To me, value is what does the other side value? What's important to the other side? So, I'll give you an example, right, that's close to home. I mean, what does Michigan State value? They value, with regards to Tom Izzo, I mean, they've got a guy who is incredibly ingrained in the community, a guy that is happy to support football in any capacity, that's happy to pick up the phone and call a softball recruit to help the softball coach, is happy to come to football games and be present and supportive, is happy to have a family and a wife that contributes to the community. Michigan State values all those things. Those things are something that they value and something that they appreciate in their coach. And all those kind of bubble up and are recognized. So when you think about value, it at the core is sitting in the other person's shoes, kind of in their head and their heart, and saying what's most important to them and what matters to them, right? So what do they value? What matters to them? I hope that answers your question, Helena. David, what other questions?
Roberta says, it has been my experience that she or he who names a price first loses. How do you lob that back so you don't end up being the first to mention a dollar figure?
So you've heard me say questions are powerful, and this again is an opportunity to just continue to flip the question back. So I think it's asking questions like, what do you think, this is worth? How much would you be willing to spend? How much would you be willing to pay? I don't know the language to use because I'm not sure what you're thinking in your head of the situation. But to me, it's continuing to ask questions. And if you come to a head, I think it's saying, look, I really want to understand where your head's at and what's important to you before I share where mine's at, because I think it's important to me that we do something that you feel is fair. So I don't want to skew you. So what's important to you? What do you value? What number do you have in your head? Is how I would do it. Again, I would lob in another question. What else, David?
That's all we have right now.
Okay, awesome. So I would just encourage you, inside of it's just I'll leave you with a couple quick thoughts. Is that I hope we can stay connected. I'm on Twitter at Molly Fletcher. My website is mollyfletcher.com. But I would encourage you to lay this hopefully over, whether it's an orthodontist, whether it's a cable bill, whether it's a salary negotiation, whether it's a difficult conversation in the office, and recognize that if we first set the stage, if we then try to ensure that we find common ground and find a way to connect, whether it be in or outside the specifics of the deal, and then thirdly, right, is that we ask for what we want with confidence. That we ask for what we want with confidence is incredibly important, and recognizing that it's analogous to a quarterback, right? And recognizing that when we make that ask, right, it's analogous to a medicine ball when we work out, that we want to just lob that big, heavy 18-pound ball over to somebody and just let it sit there. You can't juggle a medicine ball. You can't play with it. You can't do much with it. So recognizing that question is that. And then I think, fourth, we want to make sure that we embrace the pause. And that pause, like I said earlier, it can be a minute, it can be 5, it can be 2 months. But that pause signals poise, it signals confidence, it signals certainly self-control, and is incredibly powerful. And then we want to embrace and understand that leaving is an option. And I think when we think about that, it's recognizing the emotion that plays into that. And when we think about leaving, it's having the clarity before we start the discussion or inside of the discussion to get really clear on what does success look like and what are we comfortable walking away from. So I hope we can stay connected. Certainly, as I told David at the beginning of this, right, I have green blood. So anything I can do for any of you on the other end of the phone who are Spartans, know that I am happy to do that and eager to support, our wonderful school and a platform that I'm so thankful to have had. So I will close with that. But David, let me just lob in and see if there are any other questions that have come in before we.
What I see are some people thanking you, saying this is awesome, saying go green, go white. Those are the parting comments, it looks like. And with that, I would like to...
Well, good. Well, I'm sorry the chat didn't come through on...
I would like to...
Sorry, David. I'll just wrap and say, hey, thank you, and go green, go white. Absolutely. And I will be actually in Lansing on for the Michigan State Georgia Tech women's basketball game in early December. So we'll actually be doing a book signing inside the arena before the game. So if anybody's in East Lansing, maybe I can meet you live before the game. Michigan State Georgia Tech women's basketball. It'll be at Breslin. So again, thank you. Go green, go white. David, I appreciate you putting this together, man.
Thanks for being here, Molly. I'll take you up on that, so I will see you in December. I want to remind you listeners out there that the MSU Alumni Lens exists to build a portfolio of professionally and personally enriching content and experiences for Spartans around the globe. We're constantly looking for ideas regarding content and experiences that will help Spartans grow personally and professionally. Who do you think should be a presenter for us? What topics do you want to know more about? What kinds of experiences do you want to share with Spartans? If you want to email your ideas, you can send them straight to me. That's isbeld@msu.edu, or you can send them to Lisa at lisap@msu.edu. We want to hear from you, so get back with us. Thank you for being with us today. Go green.